I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these posts. But here I am, sitting in my garage at 2 a.m., staring at a toolbox that somehow holds the last shred of my relationship with my kids. Let me back up. 6 months ago, my ex-wife Sarah was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. We'd been divorced for 15 years, but we managed to co-parent our twins Jake and Mia without too much drama. They're 28 now, old enough to handle their own lives, but still at an age where their mom's presence really matters, or so I thought. Diane, my current wife, started planning a 6-week European vacation around the same time Sarah got her diagnosis. She'd been obsessed with travel blogs for years, always saving posts about bucket list experiences and sending me links to castles in Scotland or vineyards in France. I didn't think much of it at first. Diane's always been restless, the kind of person who needs a project, but then the brochures turned into spreadsheets, and the spreadsheets turned into non-refundable bookings. By the time Sarah's oncologist called me last week, she'd already spent $12,000. The doctor's voice was calm, but his words were not. Sarah's health was declining faster than expected. That night, Jake called. He didn't exactly ask me to come over. He just mentioned in his quiet, almost desperate way that Mom had been talking about me. Diane overheard, and I could tell by the way she rolled her eyes and left the room, holding her wine glass like it was some kind of weapon. I waited until dinner to bring it up. Diane had made coq au vin, one of her practice dishes for the trip. I suggested that maybe we could shorten the vacation if things got worse. She set her fork down with such deliberate care that it felt like a threat. She reminded me about the $12,000 we'd already spent and made it clear that I was, in her eyes, choosing my past over our present together. After that, the twins stopped taking my calls. The last time I spoke to Mia, she simply made it clear that I needed to let them know if I would be there for the funeral. I promised that I would do what I could, though I now regret not being stronger in my commitment. The thing is, Sarah had always been the primary caregiver after the divorce. I saw the kids every other weekend, but she was the one who helped with homework, drove them to soccer practice, and stayed up with them when they had nightmares. I had thought I was being the fun dad, but now I see I was really just more of a guest in their lives. Diane's never been comfortable with how close I stayed to the twins, how I'd drop everything as soon as they called. Once, she even remarked that I was still married to Sarah in their eyes, and maybe she wasn't wrong. A couple of days after the oncologist's call, I bought an extra flexible return ticket. I hid the receipt in my toolbox behind the socket wrenches, thinking maybe that would be enough to keep things in check. Diane, who tends to alphabetize our spice rack and keep everything in order, naturally found it. She stormed into the living room, holding the crumpled paper and accusing me of jeopardizing our relationship. I didn't bother pointing out that lately, our relationship felt like it was just her. Later, Sarah's sister texted me a photo of Sarah in hospice. She looked so small, almost lost in those stiff white sheets, while the twins appeared in the background, Mia with her hand on Sarah's shoulder and Jake staring off into space. I hadn't seen Sarah in 3 years, not since Mia's graduation when she hugged me and remarked that the kids were really something, as if she couldn't believe I'd noticed. The next day, I drove to the hospice center. When I walked in, the twins seemed to freeze. Mia barely looked at me, instead leaning down to say something quietly to Sarah. When Sarah finally opened her eyes, she offered a small smile in my direction, as if to say that the kids needed me there. I stayed only 5 minutes before I had to leave. When I got home, Diane was waiting with a packed suitcase left by the door, clearly her own. In a blunt manner, she warned me that if I went back there, I shouldn't expect to come home again. I almost laughed, shocked that in 9 years of marriage, she had ever spoken so directly. Then I found the folder. Diane had hidden it in her office filing cabinet tucked behind some old tax documents from 2014. It contained retirement plans, not the ones we had talked about, but her own. There was a solo account she'd been funneling money into, along with printouts of job postings in Portugal and Greece. The dates matched up with our supposed vacation. Jake called again last night, his voice cracking as he said that Mom was asking for me. Diane overheard this time as well. Without yelling, she stared at me and warned that if I left, she would drain our accounts, leaving me with nothing. I believed her. Sarah died at 3 a.m. Later, I listened to a short voicemail from Mia where she said that Mom had waited until I left to let go and questioned why I couldn't stay. I still don't have an answer. Diane was in the kitchen then, humming as she went over our itinerary. The twins' phone numbers are disconnected now, and the flexible ticket still sits in the toolbox, untouched. I don't know what happens next. All I know is that the toolbox used to hold all the things that fixed stuff, but now it's just full of receipts. Now for the first update. 2 weeks ago, I posted about how my wife Diane forced me to go to Europe while my ex-wife Sarah was dying, and a lot of you asked for an update. I'm writing this from a friend's couch using his Wi-Fi because Diane took everything but my toothbrush. We landed in Paris 2 days after Sarah's funeral. By the time we reached baggage claim, Diane had already posted a photo of the Eiffel Tower on her travel blog with a caption about new beginnings, accompanied by a heart emoji. Meanwhile, I kept thinking about Mia's last text, which simply said not to contact them. I must have reread it 100 times on the flight, searching for some hidden meaning or an opening where there was none. That first night, Diane arranged a Seine River cruise meant to be romantic. She wore a red dress she'd packed specifically for her social media, and I couldn't help noticing the way the fabric looked stiff, almost as if it were starched with spite. During the boat ride, she handed me her phone so she could have her picture taken as she laughed near the railing. I pretended not to notice the way she subtly pointed her ring finger toward the camera. When I excused myself to use the bathroom, she stayed behind and called out in a tone that insisted the lighting was just perfect. Once alone in a stall, I locked the door and ended up crying so hard that my ribs hurt. It wasn't for Sarah or even the kids. It was for the fact that Diane never even checked to see if I was okay. The next morning, we went to a cafe near our hotel. Diane ordered croissants in a ridiculously exaggerated French accent that was completely new to her, and she even flirted a bit with a British tour guide sitting at the next table. When I gave her a glare, she just shrugged and commented that it was harmless, although her voice carried a sharp edge that made it clear she was testing me. I couldn't help but think that a part of her wanted to push me over the edge just so she'd have an excuse to leave. Instead, I simply stirred my coffee and watched as she charmed a stranger using the same lines she'd once used on me nearly a decade ago. Things took a turn for the worse when I checked our bank account. There was a withdrawal of $12,000 from Diane's solo savings. The account, she'd insisted, was only for emergencies. It turned out that her emergency was a timeshare deposit in Lisbon. When I confronted her about it, she didn't even seem surprised, explaining in a matter-of-fact tone that she was securing her future, almost as if I were just a roommate who had been caught stealing groceries. I should have seen it coming, especially since back home, she'd started hiding her laptop screen whenever I walked by, and I'd caught her muttering about exit strategies during phone calls with her sister. At the time, I was too busy trying to get Mia to answer my calls to really connect all the dots. The final straw happened 3 days into the trip, when Diane dragged me to a vineyard outside Bordeaux. The owner kept refilling her glass while she went on at length about living with intention. When I mentioned the twins selling Sarah's house, something that an old neighbor had emailed me about, she simply rolled her eyes and dismissed it by saying they were adults and would eventually move on. The way she brushed off the idea, as if grief were just a poor signal or something trivial, made me so angry that I slammed my glass down. Wine splattered on her linen pants, but she didn't raise her voice. In that moment, she just flashed a cold smile and made it clear that if I wanted to go home, I could, but she was no longer going to carry my baggage. That very night, I used a flexible ticket to book my flight home. Diane watched me pack from the doorway with her arms crossed, while remarking that I would end up dying alone in that empty house. I almost argued and told her she was wrong, that the house wasn't empty at all, but full of Sarah's ghost, the twins' childhood art projects, and every mistake I'd ever made. But what was the point? It was clear that she had already rewritten our marriage into a cautionary tale for her blog. When I got home, the house really was empty. Diane had taken everything meaningful, photo albums, the good silverware, even the coffee maker she'd always hated. All that remained was Sarah's old reading chair, shoved into a corner as if it were nothing more than trash. I sat in that chair for an hour, breathing in the faint smell of her lavender lotion, before finally calling her sister. I later met her sister, Linda, at a diner off the highway. She handed me a note from Sarah's hospice nurse, scribbled on the back of a medication log, revealing that Sarah had told the twins not to blame me because I was stuck. When I asked Linda if she believed that, she just stirred her tea and said that Sarah had always seen the best in people, even when they hadn't quite earned it. After that, I drove to see Jake and waited in the parking lot for 20 minutes rehearsing what I wanted to say. When he finally answered the intercom, all I received was a curt statement indicating that I had chosen her and that I would have to live with the consequences. His tone was so flat, it didn't even shake with emotion. The next day, Diane's blog updated again. She had replaced our couple photos with shots of her spending time with that British guide, her hair blown by the wind, and without a wedding ring in sight. The post's theme was all about being free and traveling on her own. Comments started pouring in, calling her brave, while I found out that my credit card was declined at the gas station because Diane had emptied our joint account. It turned out that when she insisted on having her name listed as the primary on paperwork 5 years ago, it wasn't just about being organized. A lawyer told me I could fight for alimony, but only if the twins would back me up. I emailed both of them in a desperate plea, but Jake replied in a way that made it clear I had lost the right to ask for anything, and Mia didn't respond at all. So here I am, 47 years old, sleeping on a couch that smells like my friend's golden retriever. Diane's latest blog post, which came up this morning, expressed her belief that sometimes you outgrow people and that you should never look back. I suppose she might be right, but she certainly isn't the one stuck in an empty house, staring at a toolbox full of receipts for trips I never took and apologies I never made. I still don't know if the twins will ever forgive me, and I don't know if I deserve it. All I know is that while Diane is halfway to Lisbon, I'm here struggling to remember how to breathe without someone telling me when to exhale. Now for the second update. It's been 6 weeks since I last posted, and honestly, I didn't think I'd have anything left to say. But life has a way of unfolding, even when you believe there's nothing more to reveal. Diane returned from Europe 2 weeks ago, not to reconcile, but to demand a divorce. She stood in the doorway of our half-empty house, wearing designer sunglasses that made her look almost regal, and insisted that the place be sold immediately. Her expression carried the same rehearsed calm she used when negotiating over an undercooked steak at a restaurant. I didn't resist her because, really, what was the point? The woman who once cried when I forgot our anniversary now treated me like an uninvited blemish on her plans. While she was busy hiring movers, I took some time to sift through her office files. Beneath stacks of brochures for Moroccan spas and Bali retreats, I discovered the Lisbon timeshare contract. It turned out she had used $12,000 from our joint savings as a down payment. My lawyer had mentioned that, since the purchase was made during our marriage, I had a claim, even though Diane's name appeared first on the paperwork, which, of course, was exactly how she always did things. The twins had agreed to meet me at a small diner off Route 9, a neutral spot that, despite its sticky menus and coffee that hardly passed as anything more than burnt rubber, was preferable to either their apartments or Sarah's old house. Mia arrived first, taking a seat in the booth with her arms folded, while Jake showed up shortly after with his gaze fixed downward. When the waitress inquired if we needed any more time, Mia made it unmistakably clear that we weren't staying. Before long, Sarah's journal became part of the conversation. I remembered how Mia's voice had trembled as she recalled that Mom had forgiven me, though it was also made clear that forgiveness didn't erase everything. The words had lingered in the air, both sharp and final. I wanted to tell them about the hospice nurse's note, that even as I failed her, Sarah had stood up for me. But Jake interrupted, making it clear that I wasn't allowed to use her memory to ease my own pain. He even left cash for his untouched coffee and walked out, while Mia lingered just long enough to remind me to stop trying to mend what I had broken. On a Tuesday, Diane's movers arrived, and she was right there on the driveway with a clipboard in hand, overseeing the removal of the sectional we'd purchased after the twins had moved out. I managed to record her as I quietly asked why she had come back at all. With a self-assured smirk, she explained that she had been planning to leave for years, suggesting that I had simply been too oblivious to notice. Although the video ended up pixelated, her voice was unmistakably clear. My lawyer later played it in court, and eventually the judge awarded me 40% of the timeshare's value. In response, Diane erupted in the hallway, accusing me of having ruined her fresh start, and for the first time, I found myself truly indifferent. I eventually moved into a small studio apartment near Sarah's old neighborhood. The walls were thin and the shower took an eternity to warm up, but at least it was mine. One morning, while I was out buying groceries, I bumped into Sarah's hospice nurse. She recognized me immediately, not as Diane's husband or the twins' absent father, but as the man who had once stood in that hallway, shaking too much to open the door. She handed me Sarah's journal, neatly secured with a rubber band, explaining that she was convinced Sarah would have wanted me to have it. The final entry, written just 3 days before Sarah passed away, simply conveyed that I should let the kids know their dad loved them, even though he had forgotten how to show it. I made photocopies and mailed them off to Mia and Jake. Within an hour, Mia responded with a text that bluntly told me to stop trying because it wasn't enough, while Jake didn't reply at all. The next day, however, I noticed his car idling outside my building, even though he never came in. Around that time, Diane's blog went silent. A mutual friend later sent me a screenshot of a desperate post she'd made on an expat forum, asking for legal advice about a timeshare scam in Lisbon. The responses were harsh. One comment bluntly stated that I was screwed, while another cynically welcomed me to Portugal. I couldn't even muster a laugh. I began volunteering at the hospice, doing whatever was needed, from mopping floors to refilling water pitchers. One afternoon, while visiting families gathered to see their loved ones, a woman whose father was in room 212 grabbed my wrist. With sincere conviction in her tone, she made it clear that my being there was what truly mattered. I almost argued that arriving later in life didn't make up for all the times I had been absent, but I just nodded. Last week, Diane called, and there was no small talk or fake apologies. She stated flatly that she had lost everything, and for once, her voice trembled as she explained that not only had the timeshare group dissolved, but her savings had vanished too. I waited for a surge of guilt, for that old urge to fix everything, but nothing came. I simply told her that she had made her choices before she hung up. Yesterday, Jake appeared once more at my doorstep with tense shoulders, suggesting that Mom would have wanted us to make an effort. I didn't ask what that meant, nor did I dare. He stayed outside but accepted the spare key I offered. Mia eventually agreed to try family therapy, though only if I communicated through letters rather than showing up in person. My very first letter started out as 3 pages of rambling thoughts. So in the end, I tore it up and settled on a note of just 6 words that expressed my sorrow for letting her take me away from them. The therapist said that was a start. I still have no idea whether Diane remains in Lisbon or if the twins will ever let me back into their lives. Yet here I am, in this tiny studio with Sarah's journal resting on the nightstand, slowly learning to breathe without measuring every second. Maybe that's all I'll have. And maybe, just maybe, it's enough. Now for the final update. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I've spent each day learning how to exist in a life that feels both familiar and alien, like recognizing the furniture, but not knowing where the light switches are. Diane came back from Europe demanding a divorce, but not in the way you'd expect. There were no tears or apologies, only a spreadsheet of assets and a real estate agent's business card in my hand. She wanted the house sold immediately, and I didn't put up a fight. The place had stopped feeling like a home years ago. While she directed movers to pack her collection of porcelain figurines, which she had always insisted were investments, I discovered the Lisbon timeshare contract hidden in her emails. It turned out she had funneled $12,000 from our joint savings into it. My lawyer explained that I was entitled to a cut, even though the paperwork bore only Diane's signature. When the judge awarded me 40%, she screamed in the courthouse hallway, shouting that I had stolen her fresh start. I didn't realize how numb I'd become until her words simply rolled off me. The twins agreed to meet me at a diner they used to frequent with Sarah. Mia sat with her back to the wall, arms crossed, and Jake stirred his coffee as if it held the answers to every question we had never asked. Mia mentioned that Sarah had forgiven me, though her tone was as flat as reciting a grocery list, and she made it clear that forgiveness did not mean they owed me anything. Jake left cash for his untouched pie and walked out. Mia lingered just long enough to remind me not to try fixing what had been broken, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw her eyes glisten, though she quickly brushed it off. I moved into a studio apartment near Sarah's old neighborhood. The shower takes 5 minutes to warm up, and the fridge hums relentlessly like a disgruntled bee, but it's mine. One morning at the grocery store, Sarah's hospice nurse recognized me and handed over Sarah's worn journal, its spine cracked and pages dog-eared, saying that Sarah would have wanted me to have it. The final entry was about the kids, a gentle reminder that they should always know they were loved. I made copies and mailed them to Mia and Jake. Mia texted back curtly, making it clear that the gesture was not enough, while Jake stayed silent until I later saw his car idling outside my building for 20 minutes before he drove off. Volunteering at the hospice felt like stepping into a room I had avoided for decades. I mop floors, refill water pitchers, and sometimes simply sit with families waiting in the quiet. One evening, after a woman whose father was in room 212 grasped my hand, she made it clear that my presence truly mattered. I wanted to apologize and confess that it had taken me so long to show up, but all I could do was squeeze her hand in return. A month ago, Diane's blog resurfaced. Now she writes about some vague loss, painting her verses with poetic paragraphs about sunsets and empty airports. The comments have been brutal. One even remarked that it seemed karma was her constant companion. I felt nothing, just an overwhelming emptiness. Then Diane called, her voice tinny as she inquired if I would consider helping her start over. Apparently the timeshare was a scam and her savings were gone. I hung up before she could finish. Last week, Jake appeared at my door with Sarah's old toolbox, remarking that the porch swing at Mom's place was crooked. We worked together in silence, simply passing screws back and forth until the swing was fixed. When the work was done, he offered a simple thanks, and for the first time in years, that word didn't feel like a hidden barb. At a birthday party, Mia let me hold her daughter, and the baby clung to my finger the entire time. When I returned her, Mia leaned in and said softly that Mom would have loved that moment. I wasn't sure if she meant the party the garden I had started planting, or just the fact that I was there. I sold the house. Diane took her portion and then disappeared. My share went to a hospice charity in Sarah's name. The director even sent a plaque with her name on it, but I keep it tucked away in a drawer. It feels too much like a trophy for something I never earned. Now the twins and I meet once a month. Mia brings her daughter and Jake carries Sarah's journal. We never read it aloud, but pass it around like a baton. Last week, Mia wore Sarah's favorite necklace, the one I found in a box of old photos. She didn't mention it, but when our eyes met, she gently touched the pendant for a brief moment. Diane's LinkedIn now claims she's working as a receptionist at a hostel in Lisbon. Her profile photo shows a smile, yet her tired eyes tell a different story. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but I still remembered the sound of her humming while she packed her suitcase the day Sarah died. I'm not happy, not in the way people mean when they talk about closure or moving on. There's just a quiet emptiness inside me now. The twins haven't healed completely, and maybe they never will. Yet sometimes Mia sends me photos of the garden, and Jake offers a small wave when he picks up takeout from the Thai place downstairs. Sarah's journal contained an entry from right after our divorce, hinting that someday I'd come to see what truly matters. I used to think she meant something like money, time, or grand gestures. Now I believe she meant simply being there, even when it feels awkward, even when it seems too late. Yesterday, Mia told me they were trying. Just that simple admission, and for the first time in a decade, I believed her.